The bus stop stood frozen beneath drifting snow. Jack Miller sat alone on the icy bench, a retired canine dog at his feet, carrying wars no one could see etched into his bones. Then the quiet broke. Out of the white storm, a little girl came running, small, shaking, tears turning to ice on her cheeks. She stopped in front of him, looked up, and whispered, "Please help my mom. She's pregnant." In that moment, Jack understood this was no coincidence. Some storms don't arrive to destroy us. They come because God is asking one soul to stay, to stand, to choose compassion over escape. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, loyalty, and the miracles that appear after the storm. Your support truly means everything. Snow fell steadily, line over Pine Hollow, soft and relentless, as if the world had decided to pause and hold its breath for one long, unforgiving night. Jack Miller sat alone at the last bus stop at the edge of town, shoulders hunched beneath a rusted metal awning that rattled faintly in the wind. At 39, he was tall and broad-shouldered, built in the quiet, durable way of a man who had once carried heavy packs over long distances without complaint. His dark hair was cut short, practical rather than stylish, with threads of early gray creeping in at the temples. A rough beard shadowed his jaw, uneven where he had stopped caring enough to trim it properly. His face was angular, square jaw, high cheekbones, a nose that had been broken once and never quite healed straight, giving him an expression that seemed permanently alert, even when he was still. Jack's eyes were a muted steel gray, the kind that didn't wander. They watched, they measured, they remembered. He wore an old military jacket, faded and stiff with age, not because he wanted to be recognized, but because it was familiar. Since leaving the service, familiarity was one of the few things that kept his thoughts from drifting too far into places he couldn't afford to revisit. At his feet lay Ranger. The German Shepherd was just over 5 years old, large for his breed, with a powerful chest and long, muscular legs built for endurance rather than speed. His coat was a deep mix of black and tan, now dusted white, with snow that clung to his fur like ash. Silver had already begun to creep along his muzzle, a sign not only of age, but of stress, of years spent working in places where hesitation could mean death. His amber eyes remained open, calm but vigilant, tracking the movement of snowflakes and shadows beyond the bus stop. Ranger was a retired working canine trained to detect explosives and weapons. He had saved Jack's life twice overseas, once by freezing inches from a buried device. Another time, years later, by refusing to leave Jack alone during nights when memories pressed too hard against his chest. Ranger did not bark unnecessarily. He did not seek attention. His loyalty was quiet, absolute, and unwavering, like a soldier who never stopped standing guard. The bus was late. It was often late. Sometimes it didn't come at all. Jack told himself he was waiting to leave Pine Hollow, to put distance between himself and a town that felt too small, too silent, too reflective of things he preferred not to examine. In truth, he wasn't sure where he would go, even if the bus arrived. Leaving had always been easier than staying. He had spent most of his adult life perfecting the art of walking away. Ranger shifted suddenly. A low sound vibrated in the dog's chest, not a growl yet, but a warning. Jack's posture changed instantly. His spine straightened, his hand tightening slightly against his knee. Ranger never reacted without reason. Then Jack saw her. At first, she looked like a shadow torn loose from the storm. A small figure stumbled through the swirling snow, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her dark brown hair clung to her face in wet strands, snow melting into tears on her cheeks. She wore a thin jacket far too light for the cold, the fabric darkened with moisture. Pink sneakers, soaked through, slapped weakly against the icy ground as she ran. When she reached the edge of the bus stop, she stopped abruptly. Her wide eyes flicked from Jack to Ranger, fear and hope colliding in her expression. Ranger let out a single sharp bark, then fell silent, ears pricked forward, body angled protectively. Jack rose slowly, careful not to startle her, though every instinct in him had already moved forward. "Hey," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're okay." She shook her head violently. Her breath came in broken gasps, each one fogging the air. She took a hesitant step closer, as if afraid he might disappear if she didn't. "Please," she whispered, "please help my mom." Jack crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level. Up close, he could see the blue tinge at her lips, the red, cracked skin on her small hands. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she said. "Lily Parker." Her voice trembled as she forced the next words out. "She's pregnant. My dad. He's hurting her. He won't stop." The words struck Jack with physical weight. Pregnant. Hurting her. Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating against the frozen air. Jack felt something shift inside him, a familiar tightening, the kind that came before action. He had seen this fear before. In civilians. In children who learned too early how to measure danger by the sound of footsteps. Jack slipped off his heavy coat and draped it around Lily's shoulders. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed slightly as warmth settled over her. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "I'm Jack. This is Ranger. We're going to help your mom." Lily nodded frantically, tears freezing on her lashes. Jack glanced once at the empty road beyond the bus stop, where the bus should have been. Whatever plans he had made for himself ended there. "Come on," he said, standing. "Show me the way." As they stepped back into the storm, the snow fell thicker, as if the world itself were watching, waiting to see whether one man would choose to walk away or stay. The porch light flickered like a nervous eye as Jack followed Lily up the narrow path, snow crunching beneath their steps, Ranger moving ahead with his head low and focused, the way he had when danger was no longer theoretical. The house sat close to the road but felt cut off from it, a small wooden structure bearing the quiet weight of too many nights gone wrong. From inside came the unmistakable sounds of violence, wood striking wall, glass breaking, a muffled cry cut short. Lily's fingers tightened in the back of Jack's jacket, her knuckles pale, and he felt the familiar switch inside him flip from hesitation to resolve. He did not knock. Courtesy had no place here. Jack drove his boot into the door, the impact splitting the frame with a crack like a gunshot, and the door flew inward, snow and cold rushing into the living room as if winter itself had forced its way inside. The space was chaos. An overturned chair, a table shoved sideways, shards of glass glittering on the floor. Near the far wall lay Emma Parker, curled on her side, one arm wrapped protectively around her abdomen, the other braced against the floor as if she were holding herself together by force of will alone. She was in her early 30s, tall and slender, her light brown hair loose and tangled, strands stuck to her damp cheeks. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light, freckles standing out sharply against the fear draining color from her face. Her eyes snapped toward Jack with a reflexive terror born of repetition, the look of someone who had learned that men entering rooms often meant pain. Standing near the kitchen doorway was Brad Parker. He was broad and heavy-set, once strong, now softened and misshapen by years of alcohol. Dark stubble covered his jaw and neck, his hair greasy and unkempt, his flannel shirt stained and hanging loose over his frame. His face was flushed a deep red, veins standing out at his temples, eyes glassy with drink and rage. He swayed, slightly as he turned, shock flickering across his features before anger reclaimed them. "This is my house," he shouted, his words slurred but loud. Jack stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Brad and Emma, his voice calm in a way that did not invite argument. "No, it isn't." Ranger surged past Jack in a blur of black and tan, his movements precise and controlled. He did not bite. He did not snap. He launched his weight into Brad's chest, driving him backward into the wall and pinning him there, paws planted firmly, teeth bared inches from Brad's throat. The growl that filled the room was low and steady, a warning that needed no translation. Brad froze, breath coming fast, bravado evaporating under the certainty of consequence. Jack knelt beside Emma, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Emma," he said gently, "my name's Jack. Lily's safe." Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, a sob escaping instead. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, each inhale hitching as her body fought both pain and panic. Jack did not rush her. He placed himself close enough to be seen, not close enough to threaten. "Breathe with me," he said, setting a rhythm she could follow. As she struggled to match it, Jack pulled out his phone and called emergency services, his eyes never leaving the room. He spoke clearly, reporting domestic violence, a pregnant victim in distress, a child present. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, time narrowed to the essentials. Protect, stabilize, wait. Sirens cut through the snow minutes later, red and blue lights bleeding through the frost-covered windows. Ranger remained motionless, holding Brad until Jack gave the quiet command to release. The dog stepped back instantly, returning to Jack's side, eyes still locked on the man who now looked small against the wall. 2 police officers entered first. Officer Sarah Reed moved with practiced efficiency, her presence firm and composed. She was in her early 40s, average height, with a lean, athletic build shaped by years on the job. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly beneath her hat, a few strands already threaded with gray, and her sharp brown eyes missed nothing as they took in the scene. Her expression was controlled, but not cold. It carried the weight of having seen this before, and knowing exactly how it could end if handled wrong. Behind her came Officer Mark Jensen, taller and broader, his sandy hair cropped short, a thick mustache framing a mouth set in grim lines. He said little, letting Sarah take the lead as they restrained Brad, reading him his rights while he shouted incoherently, his voice losing force with every word. Paramedics followed, one of them a man named Tom Alvarez, early 30s, with kind eyes and steady hands. He knelt beside Emma, speaking softly as he checked her vitals, careful with every touch. Another medic prepared a stretcher, blankets ready. Jack stayed within Emma's line of sight as they lifted her carefully, her face tightening with pain, but her eyes never leaving Lily, who stood frozen near the doorway, small and silent. Jack opened his arms and Lily ran into them, burying her face against his chest, her body shaking now that the danger had passed. Outside, snow clung to Emma's lashes as she was loaded into the ambulance. Before the doors closed, she reached weakly for Jack's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack nodded once, unable to trust his voice. As the sirens faded into the storm and the police lights followed, taking Brad away, the house fell silent. The damage remained, broken glass, splintered wood, but for the first time that night, the violence was gone. Jack stood with Lily on the porch, Ranger seated beside them, and understood that breaking the door had been the easy part. What came next would ask more of him than force ever had. The hospital glowed against the night like a fortress built of glass and fluorescent light, a place where people believed pain could be measured, named, and neatly treated. Inside, however, the most dangerous wounds made no sound at all. Emma Parker lay in a narrow bed, surrounded by humming machines, her body wrapped in thin blankets, IV lines taped carefully to her arm. She was stable, the doctor said, a word that felt to Jack like driftwood, useful, hopeful, but far from solid ground. Emma was awake now, her eyes open and darting, tracking every shadow that crossed the ceiling. Her breathing came fast and shallow, her fingers clenched tightly into the sheet, as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored to the present. Lily slept curled in a vinyl chair beside the bed, her small body folded awkwardly, chin tucked against her chest. Her dark hair fell over her face, and every few minutes she startled awake, eyes wide, before sinking back into restless sleep. She looked younger, here stripped of the fierce courage that had carried her through the snow. Ranger lay directly in front of the door, his large body stretched across the threshold with deliberate purpose. At 5 years old, he was already graying around the muzzle, his ears twitching at each passing footstep in the hall. Nurses stepped around him without protest. Something about his stillness commanded respect. Jack sat near the window, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. Without the urgency of the house or the storm, exhaustion crept in, heavy and insistent. He felt the familiar thought rise. They're safe now. It's time to leave. He had always believed that staying too long invited loss, that distance was protection. The thought lingered until Emma's eyes finally found him. She inhaled sharply, panic tightening her face, her gaze flicking from the door to the corners of the room. She did not scream, but her eyes did. They spoke in flashes of memory, doors slamming, voices rising, the floor rushing up to meet her. Jack stood slowly, careful not to startle her. He did not touch her. Instead, he picked up a paper cup of water and set it within reach. "I'm here," he said quietly. "Ranger's here." Emma's lips curved into a brittle smile, fragile as ice. "Here," she whispered. "That never lasts." Before Jack could respond, the door opened softly, and a nurse stepped inside. Her name badge read Clara Whitman. She was in her early 40s, average height, with a gentle, solid build that spoke of long shifts and steady endurance. Her blonde hair was pulled into a low bun streaked with silver, and her pale skin was lined softly around the eyes from years of concern rather than age. She moved with calm efficiency, her voice low and reassuring as she checked Emma's vitals. "You're doing well," Clara said, meeting Emma's gaze directly. "Both of you are." Emma nodded but did not relax. Clara noticed. She always did. Her eyes flicked briefly to Jack, then to Ranger guarding the door. "He's trained," Clara said quietly, nodding toward the dog, "but there's something else there. He knows when someone's afraid." Jack only nodded. Ranger lifted his head once, then settled again. Hours passed in fragments. Doctors checking monitors, paperwork appearing and disappearing, snow continuing to fall beyond frosted windows. When Emma finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her hand still curled protectively over her abdomen, Jack rose and stepped into the hallway. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes briefly. Memories pressed in. Other hospitals, other nights, other lives balanced on thin lines. Ranger stood and pressed his head gently against Jack's leg, grounding him. When Jack returned to the room, Lily was awake, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "Is my mom okay?" she whispered. Jack knelt in front of her. "She's alive," he said honestly, "and she's getting help." Lily nodded, clinging to those words as if they were enough to build a bridge across the night. Dawn came slowly, pale light filtering through the windows. Emma woke again, calmer now, but distant, as if part of her were still bracing for impact. She looked at Jack, then at Lily, sleeping beside her. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. "I know how this goes." Jack glanced at his duffel bag resting near the chair, untouched. He thought of roads he had taken, towns he had left behind before anyone could need him. Ranger rose and moved to Lily's side, sitting down with finality. Lily stirred, one hand resting unconsciously on his fur. Jack exhaled, feeling something loosen inside his chest. "Not today," he said. Emma searched his face, looking for false promises. She found none. Instead, she found something unfamiliar. Presence without demand. Her eyes filled, not with fear this time, but with the first fragile hint of trust. Outside, the snow began to thin, the storm easing, its grip on Pine Hollow. Inside the hospital room, nothing was fixed, nothing was finished. But for the first time since the door had shattered, the silence did not feel dangerous. It felt uncertain, fragile, and just barely possible. When Emma and Lily returned home, Pine Hollow was still Pine Hollow, bare trees clawing at a gray sky, roofs crusted with old snow, and a silence that could turn ordinary sounds into threats. The restraining order against Brad sat on the kitchen table in a manila folder, official and fragile, paper-thin armor against a fear that lived in muscle and breath. Emma moved carefully through the house, tall and slender as before, but folded inward now, her shoulders drawn tight as if guarding a flame. Her light brown hair stayed tied back in a low braid, practical and controlled, and the color had not yet fully returned to her pale skin. She startled at small things, the clatter of a dropped lid, the snap of the furnace kicking on, and each time her hand went to her abdomen as if to check that the world had not stolen what she was carrying. Jack did not try to fix her with words. He had learned long ago that lectures bounce off wounds like rain on steel. Instead, he made the house predictable. He repaired the splintered doorframe he had broken, sanding the edges smooth until the latch closed with a sound softer than a sigh. He checked the locks twice, then once more, not because Emma asked, but because consistency mattered. Ranger claimed the hallway at night, his broad body stretched across the threshold like a living boundary, ears flicking at every shift of air. At 5 years old, he moved a little slower now, the silver along his muzzle more pronounced, but his presence filled the space with a calm that felt earned. Lily found humor where adults forgot to look for it. She taught Jack the difference between ocean blue and sky blue, insisting the distinction was critical to civilization. Jack argued they were the same and was promptly sentenced to coloring duty until he repented. He cooked simple meals, eggs, soup, toast, and learned the hard way that kitchens had their own kind of danger. Once he nearly burned a pot by forgetting the stove, only to turn around and find Ranger sitting, head tilted, eyes full of wordless judgment. "I know," Jack muttered. "I'm learning." Nights were the hardest. When Emma woke from sudden flashes of memory, breath tight and eyes unfocused, Jack stayed seated at a respectful distance, his hands visible, his voice low. He named the present without insisting on it, the glass of water on the table, the clock ticking softly, Lily's steady breathing down the hall. He did not ask her to talk. He waited. And slowly, Emma learned that waiting did not mean abandonment. Lily had her own work. She drew pictures of a safe house, crayons pressed hard into paper, Ranger drawn as big as a lion, Jack wearing a ridiculous crown labeled King of Doors. Emma laughed once, a short, surprised sound, then froze as if she had broken a rule. Jack met her eyes. "Laughing doesn't invite bad things back," he said. "It just means you're alive." Emma absorbed that, testing it like a step, onto thin ice. Safety, she began to understand, was not the absence of fear. It was fear that did not own the room. A knock came one afternoon, measured and careful. Jack opened the door to find Thomas Keene, the next-door neighbor, standing on the porch with his hands tucked into the pockets of a wool coat. Thomas was in his late 50s, average height, stooped slightly from years of carpentry, his white beard thick and neatly kept. His pale blue eyes were observant but kind, the sort that learned when to look away. "Just checking in," he said quietly. Heard what happened. If you need tools or help, I'm around." Jack thanked him and declined politely. Thomas nodded, accepting the boundary without offense, then glanced down at Ranger. "Good dog," he said. Ranger's tail thumped once, a single decisive beat. Later that week, Marianne Cole, a social worker assigned to the case, visited to ensure the basics were in place. She was in her early 30s, tall and slim, with dark hair pulled into a low ponytail and warm brown skin that contrasted with the winter light. Her eyes were sharp without being cold, and she asked questions plainly, listened without rushing. She noted the locks, the routine, the way Emma positioned herself near windows. "You're building safety through structure," Marianne said to Emma, not as praise, but as recognition. Emma nodded, surprised to hear her own effort named. Days stacked gently on one another. Jack drove Lily to school in the mornings, the heater humming, Ranger seated upright in the back like he was on duty. Emma avoided the windows at night, but left them open during the day, testing daylight the way one tests water temperature. She slept with a lamp on, then some nights turned it off. None of it was heroic. All of it was difficult. One evening, as snow began to thin and the house settled into a quiet that did not feel predatory, Emma sat at the table with tea cradled between her hands. "I don't trust men," she said, not accusing, just honest. "Not their voices, not their promises." Jack nodded. "You don't have to," he said. "I'll keep my distance, whatever you need." She looked at him for a long moment, measuring the space he took up, and the space he did not. Lily padded in, backpack dragging, and leaned against Jack's side without asking. He stayed still, afraid that moving would undo the fragile geometry of the moment. Safety, Emma realized, was being allowed to choose. It was doors that closed quietly. It was a dog that did not sleep through the night. It was a man who stayed without claiming anything in return. Time moved the way snow melts, quietly, without ceremony, leaving behind dark soil and the first stubborn hints of green. The trial concluded on a gray morning that felt heavier than it looked. Jack stood at the back of the small courtroom, hands loosely clasped behind him, Ranger seated at his heel, still as stone. Brad Parker was sentenced to prison for aggravated domestic assault. The judge's gavel fell once, clean and final, a sound less like punishment than a door closing at last. Brad did not look at Emma. He stared at the floor, shoulders slumped, his earlier bluster long burned away by consequence. Emma exhaled and startled at the sound of her own breath, as if she had forgotten she was allowed to let go. She did not feel suddenly healed. No verdict could erase the way her body braced when a door slammed, or the way her heart leapt at raised voices. But something inside her loosened enough to let sleep come more easily. Nights grew longer, steadier. She drew the curtains. Later, she began to believe, cautiously, that her body was not only a vessel for pain, but a shelter for life. Lily returned to being a child in ways that were small and profound. She ran again, laughed without checking the room first, asked questions that sounded silly, and worked like medicine. "Will the baby like Ranger more than me?" she asked one afternoon, chin propped in her hands. "Who does Ranger like best?" Ranger solved the debate by yawning wide and planting himself squarely across the hallway, as if declaring shared custody of everyone. He was 5.5 now, his muzzle noticeably silvered, his movements slower but deliberate, his vigilance unchanged. Emma's pregnancy stabilized. Each appointment came with careful explanations and cautious reassurance. Dr. Elaine Porter, her obstetrician, became a steady presence. A woman in her late 40s with short dark hair threaded with gray, solidly built, her posture calm and unhurried. Dr. Porter spoke plainly, avoided false optimism, and met Emma's eyes when she talked about trauma and stress. "Your body's been through a lot," she said once, voice firm but kind. "That doesn't mean it can't do this. It means we take care. Emma trusted her, perhaps because trust now came with boundaries. Jack kept to the edges of the household, fixing what broke, learning which groceries Emma preferred, and which made her nauseous, driving Lily to school each morning with the heater humming and Ranger upright in the back like a sentry. He never announced permanence. He renewed it daily in small ways, by showing up, by asking before entering a room, by leaving space when quiet was needed. When labor came, it did not arrive with sirens or panic. It came on a clear morning, sunlight slanting through the curtains like a benediction. Jack waited with Lily in the hospital hallway, Ranger lying at his feet, ears flicking at each passing sound. Lily clasped Jack's sleeve and whispered facts she remembered from school, her voice serious and proud. When the cry finally came, strong, unmistakable, Lily covered her mouth, eyes shining. Emma delivered a healthy baby girl. She named her Hope, a name that fit easily, as if it had been waiting. Hope's skin was warm and pink, her fists opening and closing with solemn intent, her breath steady. In the weeks that followed, the house adjusted again. Sleep arrived in fragments, but fear did not return with it. Emma moved with new confidence, her body strong, her gaze steadier. Lily took on the role of big sister with fierce devotion, reading aloud in a voice far too formal for picture books. Jack learned to mix formula with the careful concentration of someone diffusing a device, earning Ranger's silent approval by not spilling. Ranger claimed a spot beside the crib, breathing evenly, ears attuned not to danger now, but to the small, ordinary sounds of peace. He did not bark. He stayed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in gold, Emma spoke the truth they had all been circling. "You don't have to leave," she said simply. There was no plea in her voice, no fear, only an opening. Jack looked at Lily sprawled on the floor, at Hope sleeping against Emma's shoulder, at Ranger watching them all with quiet certainty. He smiled, small and honest. "I know," he said, "but I want to stay." In that moment, Pine Hollow stopped being a place Jack passed through. It became a place he returned to at the end of the day, a place where survival had grown into living, where healing did not erase the past but redeemed it, and where a baby named Hope slept safely under the watch of those who chose, again and again, to stay. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. They come quietly, through a stranger who chooses not to walk away, through a child brave enough to ask for help, through a loyal companion who stands guard when fear is loud. God's grace often reaches us in ordinary moments, through ordinary people, right when we believe we have nothing left to give. If you are watching this today while carrying pain, fear, or uncertainty, know this: you are not forgotten. God sees the silent battles we fight and sends help in ways we may not recognize at first, but always at the moment we need it most. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope. Today, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from or what part of this story spoke to you. And consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss more stories of faith, healing, loyalty, and love. May God bless you and your family, protect you on your journey, and fill your life with peace, courage, and light, especially after the storm.